How's everybody doing? Shelley is the cheerleader, the lead cheerleader on campus. So if it weren't for the fact that this is being live streamed, I would gather this group together and just sit down and have a conversation with you. And so know that after this is done, if you have specific questions or you want to talk more in a smaller group, we can certainly do that given the folks who are in the room. I want to thank you for being here. My name is Donna Eddleman. I'm the University Dean for Student Affairs. The name might sound familiar if you've read any of the updates that have been coming to students for far too long, personally, I think, in terms of COVID, but we're really glad that you're here. My goal today is to talk a little bit about what I hope for most of you has been. Let me back up. I want to talk about a partnership. And I know that those in the room probably are in different places in terms of the relationship that they've established with their student because your students, some of them may have been enrolled all this time, some of them may have spent some time on campus in the spring, etc. But at the end of the day, what I believe and what I know is that student success is not just about the work that we do, it's about the collective work that we do in collaboration with you and with others to help students be successful. So that's why the title here is Let the Journey Begin, sort of, because you and your students are likely in different places in terms of the journey that you are on and they've been on. So I want to start by learning a little bit about those of you in the room in terms of where your student is. How many of you, this is the first semester that your student is living on campus, so they didn't live on campus in the spring? Okay. And then how many of you, your student deferred, and so is just starting? Okay, how many of your student is a transfer student from somewhere else? Okay, so what I want to do is create an environment in which you leave here thinking about some things that I hope will help you to make successful and us successful in terms of our collective relationship and support of your student. So let me start by simply saying congratulations. How many of you wondered at times whether or not we would get to this day? Yep. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that this has been really challenging. But I can assure you that there's a whole lot of people who have worked really, really hard to get to where we are. And so I want to learn a little bit. How many of you, this is your first student that you've dropped off to college? How many of you, this is your second one? Third? Fourth? Okay. How many of you your students are legacy? Any of you graduated from the University of Redlands? Ooh. Well, welcome to Bulldog Nation. That's great. So again, what I want to do is spend some time with you talking about the relationship and the value that we hope is created because of our willingness to engage with you in ways that you might not see at other institutions, in part because we're small, in part because for us it is really important that we have some ownership and we have a collective responsibility to you and your student. So with that in mind, let me start by giving you a little bit of perspective on me and how I think about my work and sort of my background that led me here and how I think about the work that we do in student affairs. So, first of all, I'm a first-generation college student. I grew up in Pleasant Valley, New York, or New York. I'm a Mets fan, not a Yankees fan, unless if the Yankees get to the World Series, I'll cheer for them. And I actually, if someone had ever told me that when I was an undergraduate at the local community college, that I would stand in front of all of you with a DR in front of my name, having been able to pursue and earn my doctorate, I wouldn't have believed it to be true. When I said yes to the University of Redlands 4 years ago, I've just started my 5th year, part of the reason I said yes was because of the commitment that the institution has to first-generation students as well as underrepresented populations. Our first generation, the incoming class, 40% of our incoming class is first generation. And I think that says something about an institution that probably, because it's a small private, people make assumptions about where our priorities are and what our student body might look like. And yet I think the richness and the diversity of our student population says something. So for me, that was really important. So in addition to that, so I've been really fortunate. When I was an RA in college, my senior year, I became an RA because I needed the money. My dad had been sick for most of my life. He had a really, really challenging year. And so I made the decision that I needed to help pay my way, and so I became an RA. If someone had told me that that would be the start of my career in higher education, I wouldn't have believed it. So this is my 33rd year in higher education. I started when I was 10. I was an early admit to college, you know how it all goes. And I've been very fortunate. This is my 10th institution. I will say that I think the food service here is the best of any of the 9 other institutions that I was at. And I've been really fortunate to have worked in New York, where I started out at a small Catholic school. I've worked at Southern Utah University. I've worked in Texas. I've worked in Virginia. And I actually spent some time at NYU in Abu Dhabi in the Middle East. And I've seen a lot. I've certainly been blessed with knowing a lot of students and their families and have stories to tell that could fill several chapters. And it's that lens by which I look at students and parents, because I've been married a long time. My husband would probably say too long, 30 years, but he and I don't have children. But what he would say if he was in the room, if he was willing to stand up and admit it, he would say we have lots of children. Because we've spent a lot of our time with students, getting to know students and getting to know parents and doing our very best to provide support and create meaning for the college experience. So that's a little bit about me, and that's the lens by which I think about and really talk about the student experience. So now a little bit about student affairs. This is the portfolio that is student affairs, and so this is the area that I'm responsible for. And you'll notice that a majority, actually all of these things, happen outside the classroom. And I believe if you were to talk to those of you who have been to college, and if you were to talk to people who have been to college, the first story they tell about their best experience at college is likely not about some chemistry class, right? And it's probably not about the book they read for some assignment. A majority of the stories that you hear, at least initially, is about the experience outside the classroom. And for us, we're really focused on making sure that the experiences that we try to create, we like to think about it as bringing to life the lessons of the classroom. So taking what they learn in the classroom and creating opportunities, or challenging them to to use those skills to find their way through. Because what we want is the student who starts out today or started out a year ago, we want that student to be changed in significant and meaningful ways, so that the student that you see when they walk across the stage at graduation is different. They are a better version of themselves. They're making positive contributions to their community, and hopefully much more broad than just in their community. And they're individuals who you understand and see the growth and development, and you appreciate the impact, and there's significant meaning in terms of that journey. And so I would use community service learning as a great example. We know that service can be transformational, not just because they worked in a food pantry, or they went down on Friday mornings and served at the local, at Redlands Community Center. Where it's most impactful is when they spend the time to reflect on what they learned, what they came to understand, and how their view of that situation or those individuals or the world is different. And that's the reward that we have. That's why I think student affairs professionals do what we do. It's about evolving and changing. It's about a roommate conflict where we don't fix it for them. We encourage them, we help them to sit down and problem solve. And we want you to help us to do the same thing. So in simple terms, it's really 2 words. And you've probably seen this on the backs of some of the shirts of some of the students today. I hate to admit it, but I got one of those shirts and I only had it for 24 hours and I lost it. So I couldn't even wear it. But anyway, on the backs of the shirts, this is learning applied. That's what we do. And that's what we need you to do alongside of us. And it's really this model of challenge and support. And anybody who went through higher education, went to school for higher education, knows of Sanford and is this whole idea of challenging and supporting. And that's what we try to do. So instead of simply fixing it or solving the problem or picking up the phone and developing solutions for students, we're going to challenge them. We're going to support them to fix it themselves, and we're going to challenge them to get outside their comfort zone. Do something you've never done before. Take a course that you know nothing about. Go to a play, even though you've never been to one. Ask hard questions. Be willing to be uncomfortable in a space which is new to you. In fact, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if you can do that, the likelihood of you finding your way and creating better understanding is pretty significant. So it's learning apply. Very quickly, as a division, we have made these commitments to students. This is the growth that we want to support. This is what the skills that we want to help your students develop. Again, so that when the student who walks across the stage at graduation is different, is more confident, is more thoughtful and respectful in their thinking about others and the world, who have found some meaning, who have a greater willingness to persevere, who will ask hard questions, who will engage in taking care of others and supporting others in meaningful ways, and quite frankly, will communicate more effectively, more meaningfully, with more deliberate in terms of who they are and how they represent themselves and others. So these are big asks for students. I'll tell you, it's also big asks for us. I talk about the division and I say we're small, but we're mighty, because relatively speaking, student affairs is a small division, but I would suggest because of the work we do and the interest of students to be engaged on campus, we have tremendous opportunity to make connections. And I would suggest in really powerful ways. So when you think about that work, let's talk about some perspective. I don't know what year this is, but this is a long time ago. Probably before all of us were born. And when you think about then and now, let's face it, things were really different. And different doesn't necessarily mean bad, but it was different. And so when I think about then, options were fewer. And I gave this example yesterday. Have you ever counted the number of dishwashing detergent options you have in the grocery store? It's crazy. The other one for me is peanuts. And I say that only because my husband likes peanuts, but the options that you have in a store are really quite significant. And even when you look at majors on college campuses these days, there's all kinds. So options were fewer, and I would suggest fewer options maybe made it easier. Competition was less intense. You didn't have people fighting on the field or the court. You didn't have everybody getting a trophy. It was different. Community was the neighborhood, right? It's the people who lived next door. It's the people you went out back and caught fireflies at night with. At least that's what we did in New York. And it also included some faith component, a church or a synagogue, a church building, some religious connection. And as we know, nationally and really internationally, that piece is very different. And again, different isn't bad, it's just different. News was just news. Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw, just telling you the facts. And it's hard to find that now, which makes it complicated. Forming your own opinion becomes more difficult because you're hearing the opinion of others embedded in the news. And that makes it hard for all of us to think independently. And for students, it may be all they've ever seen or known. And then quite frankly, parents were on the sidelines. And now there's the conversations about the helicopter parents who want to swoop in and, or hover. You just want to kind of hover over things and make sure everything's okay. And I'm going to guess that there are probably some in the audience who that's where they find their place. That's where you find your place. There's the Black Hawk parent who wants to swoop in and take care of it, right? Just make it better. And I respect that. I really do. But what I need you to think about is what might you do differently in terms of this idea of challenge and support. Because again, what we want to do is get them from point A to point G, being graduation, in a way that adds value. Communication. So when I was in college, I called home every Sunday. I went to my last 2 years, I did 2 years at a community college and lived at home. Getting my undergraduate degree, my last 2 years, I went to the State University of New York at Albany. And I had 5 suite mates. And so I got the phone on Sunday nights at 7 o'clock. And it was in the hallway on the wall, and it was a dial, right? Rotary. And I took Sundays at 7 because if you recall, on the weekends after 7 o'clock, it was cheaper, right? Per minute, it was cheaper to, maybe I'm so old you all don't remember that. That could be possible, I guess. And mom would be on one end of one phone, and dad would be on another, and that was it. That was the only, once a week. Now, how many of you have talked to your student by text or by phone at least 3 times today? 4? 5? 6? 7? And that, again, different, not necessarily bad, but different. But what we know is that in terms of the independence that we want students to create, thinking about that connection and what that looks like moving forward is going to be important. I wrote letters to family and friends. How many of your students have written a letter, handwritten, put it in the mail with a stamp in the last 3 months? Things are different. So the question, for me is, was life more simple way back when? I have my own opinion. But again, for some people, different isn't bad. It's just different. I waited in line to register for classes. How many of you went to college and remember having to wait in line and hoping that when you got up to the front after waiting for like 30 minutes, that there was just one last card for that English class at 11 o'clock because there's no way you were going in the 8 o'clock class, right? Well, now it's on demand in many ways. As you know, students can go out electronically and register for classes. Ridiculously convenient, for sure. But I remember, this was a number of years ago, but we had a student whose mom called. And mom was frustrated because she was on her cell phone with her daughter and on the hard line with us and saying she couldn't get registered for classes and what we were going to do about it. And so we said, well, where is your daughter? They told us the hall that she was in on campus, and we said, have your daughter hang up the phone and walk over to the registrar's office, which is about 400 feet away. But mom, again, was solving the problem because the on-demand service wasn't working. I went to the library to do research. And one of the things about the library is certainly a place to make connections and build community, and yet the convenience of online research, accessing the library online, let's face it, it's convenient. You have it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which really isn't bad, but again, there are implications when you sit behind a computer or not engage in meaningful ways, especially when we think about the skills that we want students to develop. And then you met with faculty face-to-face, and admittedly over the past 18 months, that's been really hard. But obviously we are trying to change that. We want to change that on campus, and that's why we're so committed to having everyone back and to keeping everyone safe. So the theme here is that basically communication has changed dramatically. And what we find is some of the ways in which I would suggest we grew and developed, both in terms of our confidence and our knowledge and our relationships, is we weren't behind a screen. We were compelled to be in a room and engaging with people. Communication was, it was more authentic, and I would suggest that in many ways it was more managed. And what I mean by that is it can be really easy to be behind a screen and say whatever you want, right? And sometimes you might say something that you didn't mean to, but you say it anyway. Sometimes the person who is receiving the message hears tone that's not intended to be there. Text messages make it really easy to communicate, but that meaningful communication goes away. And so there are some challenges with the ways in which we can communicate. And I would suggest that's something that you have to think about in terms of how will you communicate with your student. When you leave tonight or tomorrow morning, what do you expect? How will you communicate with each other? Will it be more than just text messages? Will you have some meaningful time with them? Because that can certainly make a difference. So life is complicated, it's challenging. The thing that we have to remember about your student is, this is Chickering's 7 vectors and then a little sum. And basically there's a lot that's happening with a student during this period of time in their lives. And some of the work that we do is rooted in these types of theories. Again, the challenge and support piece, but it's also this acknowledgement that when students get here, why do we do orientation? Because we want them to get connected. We want them to build relationships because that's part of their journey. It's also important because we know that we know that many students leave institutions of higher education not because they need more financial aid, not because they can't manage it academically. They leave because they don't feel connected. They don't feel like they have a sense of community or a place of belonging. And one of the challenges, but in some ways an opportunity, the person that you brought to campus today, their identity is based on a life and an experience that suddenly, that ended, really, the moment they got out of the car. Right? Everything they knew, even if, going back to high school in terms of what their identity looked like, how they were identified, even over the past year, if they deferred or were not on campus, that identity stopped when they got out of the car. Who they are now and who they become will be a really interesting evolution. For some students who only knew themselves as, whether it be the quarterback on the high school team or the neighbor down the street, the young man down the street that the neighbors relied on for X, Y, or Z, that's gone. The circle of friends they had will be very different. How they interact with those friends, how they are identified with those friends, all of that is going to be in transition. And quite frankly, it's going to be challenging at times. It will be challenging for you, and it will be challenging for them. They're out there right now with orientation leaders to help them, doing very intentional things in terms of building community, to help them feel a sense of place and a sense of belonging. So it's a very interesting path, both in terms of their social development, their emotional development, and their spiritual development. Like I shared, there's some really interesting research out there about faith in America and just religion and spirituality broadly, and the journey that students are on, and we all are on in some ways, especially given COVID-19. So as you're working with your student and you're trying to help them, and they're making decisions and they're finding their way, keep in mind that this first semester on campus, it'll have some challenges. And being patient and asking good questions will be important so that you're in the best position to help them. This is complicated enough, but COVID-19 has created an environment that I have described to my staff for the past 18 months. We are trying to be logical in an illogical environment, right? Different opinions, different science, different decisions that have to be made in terms of environments, and behavior. And so it's further complicated. Life in itself for young adults has been further complicated by COVID. And fortunately for the University of Redlands, there's actually going to be a memo that will go out tomorrow where we've actually enhanced some of our mental health support, providing free counseling, 12 sessions through timely cares, and also some strong partnerships with some resources in town, knowing that it's going to be challenging. One of the first things that our new president said in an interview that I was a part of with the cabinet, and she made the observation that students, we are all coming back to campus, gathering on campus for the purpose of healing. And I actually think that's true. People want to be here. We want you to be here. And so understanding that and acknowledging that and the impact that COVID-19 has had and will have on all of us is important. And actually, quite frankly, I think being patient and understanding what that might mean. But I will tell you, the students last semester, they wanted so much to be here. They did everything they needed to do. And we're seeing that same behavior over the past actually for about 2 weeks now, because we've had some students here for a long time. So it's really rewarding. So yep, we're gonna do our best to be logical in an illogical environment, but it's something that we have to account for in terms of the experiences that we all will have, but your students in particular. So what does this mean? So communication and ways of communication like Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, one of the challenges is, I call it profiles of perfection. We compare ourselves to others. And we compare ourselves to the Facebook stories, not the real stories. And admittedly, there are some Facebook stories that are sad and tragic, but typically the profiles online are that life is great, vacations are terrific, etc. And that can be hard for those whose profile is not perfection. But it's also important for them all of us to recognize that is that people choose to put on a screen, but that can have an impact. They've argued, there's been some literature out there that talks about the lack of resiliency among this generation. I will challenge that for your students and right now students in college. In fact, I make some brief comments tonight at the President's Convocation, and what I will celebrate with you and your students is resiliency. Everybody had choices to make, and everybody had decisions to make. And you and your student decided to persist and to be here. And I would suggest that demonstrates resiliency in ways that I don't know when we'll see that again. Communication skills, generally, what career development folks will tell you is that the ability to write and speak effectively is one of the most significant skill. It's absent in many of the graduates of higher education. And so one of the things that we push, and I noted it as one of our learning outcomes, is that we want students to be able to communicate effectively in writing, verbally as well as in writing. And so if a student emails me and says, "Hey, Donna," I'm going to write them back and say, "Start again." And it's not because I'm the dean, it's just how they interact online is going to be important. And so again, communication skills is something we work on. It's something you could also, help encourage your student, coach them in terms of talking to an advisor when they need to talk to a faculty member. Ask them to role play it with you so that they understand how important it is to be effective in that regard. Problem solving, we work to try to help students solve problems because what do they do? When a student has a problem, well, what do we all do, maybe? We Google it, right? To get the answer. And what we try to do is help students to work through their problems, again, with the model of challenging and supporting. Talked about writing skills around communication, and then resiliency and confidence. And again, I do think that your students and those like your students have confronted some challenges, and yet they've been more resilient than I think many people thought they would be. So I celebrate that. So things are different, life is complicated, and COVID has changed us. So now my question is, how will you provide support and counsel to your student? What role will you play? How will you engage with them? What are the questions you'll be sure to ask? I'm going to ask you to think about this ABCD model. The first one is assume goodwill. And I'll be selfish and say I'm asking that you assume goodwill in terms of your interaction with your student relative to the decisions they made, but also assume goodwill on the part of the institution. Here's my news flash for today. We are never going to intentionally make your student's life miserable. Will they have some challenging times? Sure. Will they be disappointed in some of the decisions we make? Sure. Might their ID not work when they go to breakfast in the morning? Yep, that happened this morning. But the way that we approach our work with an assumption is with an assumption of goodwill. And we do that because if you assume goodwill in interacting with us or with your student, and they do the same, then the outcome will be better than if the approach is different. Because we're not trying to make you miserable, and we're not trying to make your student miserable. And admittedly, they may make some decisions that you're like, what? But when you get to the point where you're asking them why, and I encourage you to ask them why, start from a frame of assuming goodwill. They made a decision because of something I didn't know about. Or I'm going to start from this place where I'm going to assume that the decision was a wise one, but I didn't understand. I don't understand the context. So A, assume goodwill. Second, be a coach. What do coaches do? They stand on the sidelines. They cheer them on. They give advice. They establish strategy. They congratulate. Think about being a coach and not a helicopter. Think about ways in which you can help your student to build confidence, to solve problems in ways that help them grow. You know, there's a tendency, it's interesting, sometimes student and parent will walk up to check in and the parent's talking. And that's how it's been. Start thinking about stepping back and letting them take a lead role if you haven't already. Be a coach. Cheer them on. Help them develop a strategy. Communicate expectations. I'll tell you a story. So years ago, I did something similar to this, and at a freshman orientation. And 4 years later, Jonathan Janice's mother came up to me, and she said, I still remember when you talked about communicating expectations. And she talked about the conversation she had with Jonathan, and she said, what I didn't expect is at the end of his first semester, he would come home with an earring in his eyebrow. And she said, I missed that expectation. And I said to her, if that's the worst thing Jonathan did in 4 years, you really did okay. And Jonathan was a great young man and actually is very successful in LA right now as a designer. But expectations, if you have certain things that you expect of your student, have you told them what they are? Whether it be expectations relative to grades, or expectations relative to finance, or expectations in terms of coming home at Thanksgiving. Because if it's not going to be okay for your student to call and say, Johnny's asked me to go to X for Thanksgiving and I'm going to go there instead, tell them that. Do you have expectations in terms of their academic performance? Are there certain things tied to that? Is there expectations in terms, things like when they get a bad grade? Do you want to hear it from them, or do you want to see it on the transcript? Are you going to start out with an expectation that you have access to their student records? Or are you going to say, we're going to start out by trusting you, and if we find if there's concerns and we need to change, we'll do that. but we're going to start out expecting that you're going to share that information with us. Whatever your expectations are, have that conversation so that you're not disappointed and they're not disappointed. Because the tension that can create can be really hard, especially from a distance. And the last one is dare them to dream. If I had it to do all over again, I would have studied away. I was 32 years old before I had a passport. And regrettably, I had to get a passport because I had to go, I had a student, I was a dean, and I had a student who passed away in Belgium. And I had to go bring Johnny home. And what I wish I had done, especially after seeing so many students here come back from a study away experience, I wish I'd done it. I think I would have, I know I would have traveled more. I think I would be much more informed, and I think I would have come to appreciate diversity and the value of understanding other nations and other cultures. I just know that experience would have been really good. So for me, I should have dreamed. I should have dreamed bigger. And so help your student dream. Admittedly, they may be here and they think they're on the path that, they're going to get from A to B and they're going to leave and they're going to be an accountant or a doctor or a teacher or whatever it might be. But if they decide they want to swerve a little to the right or the left, tell them to talk to their advisor. And if they want to swerve, try to let them swerve. Maybe not in their senior year last semester, but let them swerve. Let them dream. Help them dream. Ask good questions. So assume goodwill. Mistakes will be made. How will you respond? Be a coach. Motivate, listen, encourage, challenge, support. And let me tell you a little story about being a coach. So again, first generation student. I'm in my third year of college. I'm living in Albany, New York. Sunday night, 7 o'clock. I call mom and dad. Great conversation. I need to know what's happening in the valley, Pleasant Valley. Needed all the scoop, small town. And had a great conversation with mom and dad, and as we're getting ready to get off the phone, my dad says, "How are classes going?" And there's this pregnant pause. And my dad said, "Donna Marie, how are classes going?" Well, by then I'm crying because I had to tell them that I failed my first test ever. So I told him I failed. Pregnant pause again. He says, "Donna Marie, in 5 years, is it really going to matter that you failed a test this week?" Now that was a long time ago. And I still remember that conversation and the impact it had on me. Because it gave me perspective. Now my dad, being a coach, not literally, but playing the coach role, he followed up his comment with, "Have you talked to the teacher? Do you have anybody to study with? Have you used the library?" And again, it helped me have perspective, and it also said to me, it's okay to disappoint them. Because I knew they were disappointed. So be a coach. Communicate expectations. What are your expectations? Do they align with theirs? What are non-negotiables? And Thanksgiving might be a non-negotiable, but what is non-negotiable? What must they understand you expect of them? And there's no wiggle room. And maybe there aren't any non-negotiables, but I think there probably are some non-negotiables. And then dare them to dream. What would you do if you weren't afraid? What would they do if they weren't afraid? And then when you're debating and you're like, I don't know, ask yourself, is this about me or is this about them? And then what might it mean if I said yes? I think those questions can be helpful when you're trying to find your way through something that's kind of a little out of your comfort zone in terms of what they want to do. Ask yourselves those questions and ask them those questions as well. So one more time. Assume goodwill, be a coach, communicate expectations, dare them to dream. I'm giving you this information because this is how we do our work. And my hope is that our relationship continues to grow and the partnership leads to tremendous success for your student and, quite frankly, the community that they have joined. The more the more our philosophies are aligned and the better we understand each other, the more successful we will be. And therefore, the more successful your student will be. This journey, it will be different than anything they have experienced and anything you have experienced, and in some ways, different than anything any of us have experienced because of the pandemic. But different isn't bad, it's just different. And let's face it, it's complicated and it's hard. But I can tell you, after 33 years, it's really worth it. Goodbye today will be hard. But what I hope you know and can appreciate is your student will be surrounded by people who genuinely care about them, who want them to be successful. And it's not just the people who are employed here, it's the students in our community. There's value in the size of this institution. It's hard for a student to get lost in the shuffle. And then the outcomes are tremendous. The stories of our graduates and what they've done and who they've become, it's pretty impressive. And in my own experience, I have tremendous, tremendous stories. You know, David Mick, who drove me crazy because he got in trouble as a freshman and so he couldn't be in the residence halls. Every month, third Thursday of the month, he would come and meet with me and ask again, can I please go in the, no. Wasn't my decision, it was a panel, no. Fast forward 3.5 years. I wrote David a letter to get into law school. Graduated from law school. Fast forward 16 years. Had a friend of mine in Chesapeake, Virginia, whose son was in trouble. I knew David was an attorney in Chesapeake, Virginia. I hunted him down on Facebook and asked him for some help. And he wrote back, given all the help you gave me to get where I am, yeah, I'll help you. There's stories out there. Your student will be a story. And the more that we're aligned, and the more that we work together, and the more that we agree that we're going to assume goodwill and we're going to do our very best, the better the outcome. Two most significant parts of my year, every year, is orientation, because you see them coming in. And they're big-eyed, and they're a little hesitant. They're not really sure. But I see students who care about them and volunteer their time as orientation leaders, and I know it's going to be okay. And then graduation day. I don't stay at I get done with graduation and I beeline for my car. Why? Because I cry. Because you know who they were and you know who they are. And at an institution like this, you get to know their stories. It's going to be worth the ride, and we're in this together. Thank you. Does anybody have questions? Jameson is kind enough to offer to run around with a microphone if anybody has questions, comments, curiosities. And there he goes. Da-da-dun, 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 da-da-dun.
Hi, I wanted you to, if you could please clarify a little bit about the counseling that's available for the students this year. You had referred to a possibility for students having access to counseling.
Yeah, I don't have any, I can't hear. I'm not sure what that means.
Do you want me to try again?
try it one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. You had referenced an opportunity for the students to receive counseling this year. Could you expand a little bit more on that, and how do they go about signing up? Or how do we coach them to go sign up?
Good. Okay, so first of all, if you are on the parent mailing list, you will get this message tomorrow. If you are not, we need to get you the link to get on the parent mailing list. So what we are going to announce tomorrow, which is in effect on September 1st, is we have contracted, so have you heard of Timely MD? They have a subsidiary, it's called Timely Cares. And Care. I don't think it has an S on the end. And basically, it is a counseling service that is available. We have contracted with them to be available to all of our students, graduate, undergraduate, in Redlands, in Marin, on any of our regional campuses. And basically, through an app in which they identify as a University of Redlands students, they have basically on-demand access to counselors from all 50 states with all kinds of skill sets at no cost to them for up to 12 sessions. Now that's in addition to a counseling center on campus. Our counseling center on campus is more short-term care. In fact, a lot of our students find they just need one session just to get through, over a hurdle. So our counseling center focuses on short-term care. We do have a psychiatrist on campus for a short, 10 hours a week for students who need support in terms of prescription. We also have a relationship with Citrus Counseling Services, which is a local provider, and they have about 40 therapists on campus, some of whom will actually come to campus and provide support to students. And so there will be a memo that goes out tomorrow, and it will announce Timely Care, and then it will also reference Citrus Counseling and a number of other opportunities, and then there's a link to our counseling center page. So right now, I would suggest that the University of Redlands has more resources for mental health support than it's had maybe in its history because of the partnerships. 2 of the services are free. The rest of so our counseling center staff, their support is at no cost, and Timely Care is at no cost. The CCS, the Citrus Counseling Service relationship, that is on a sliding scale, and that company does, Citrus Counseling Services does take the university's insurance as well as a variety of others. And the number for the counseling center, if your student has questions, they can just call the counseling center and they can guide them. If they need a referral, they can guide them. If your student is currently in therapy, we strongly encourage to maintain that relationship virtually, because being in transition, going from home to here, and also transitioning with a therapist can be really difficult. So start by continuing to maintain that relationship with their therapist, and then make a transition after they are here and settled and feel comfortable establishing a new relationship. That might have been more than you needed, but I hope that was helpful. Okay. Other questions or comments?
How many students per grade are on campus this year, and how does that compare to, just say, a couple years ago, not last year?
Oh, so I can tell you there's about 1,530 students on campus. This is a guess. I don't really, that's hard. My gut tells me it may be more evenly distributed than ever before, in part because our freshman class, our first year class, and our sophomores, those numbers are smaller because of decisions that families made in terms of enrolling. And then, so our senior class and junior class, it really could be probably really close to, I don't think it's 25% each, but I think it's probably more even. We did, and some of you may know this, but we did really focus on, we were very cognizant that we didn't want to have first-year students and sophomore students on campus, with disproportionately first-year and sophomore, because we really believe that the relationships and the role modeling that our juniors and seniors can do for students on campus was really important. And so, you know, we have a 4-year residency requirement, but so we really held to that this year because we were very intentional. We wanted to build community and develop traditions, and we saw that happening more effectively. And we know the more connected you feel, I said this earlier, the more likely you are to persist. And so I don't know the percentage, but I would suggest it's probably more balanced than it has been historically because of the numbers and because of the decisions that we made as an institution. Sorry, I can't be specific. Do you want to know our vaccination rate? It's like, we ran the numbers today, 94% of our students are vaccinated. And that number, the exempt category actually includes some students who are halfway through the vaccination protocol. So it's possible that that number is big enough that it could be more than 94%. Now, admittedly, not everybody has turned in their stuff. They still have a couple more days. But yeah, we're at 94% today. So yeah. So thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I have twins on campus, sophomores, and you mentioned the study abroad program. Is this commitment to studying abroad, is that one full semester? Is it a certain number of weeks? And when do they start looking into that?
So study abroad can be in a variety of different ways. Generally, it's one semester, and students usually go in their sophomore or junior year. Part of it depends on what their major is. Part of it depends for student athletes. It varies. You know, they might go a fall semester or a spring semester, just depending on their sport. It's really important that you coach your student to make sure that the advisor knows if indeed they want to study away, and that way they can build it into their strategy, you know, at the start and figure out when that might be. Some students choose to study away over a May term, and those trips are anywhere from a week to 3 weeks, where they can also travel. Now, in theory, you could do both. You could do a short term, you could do a May term study away experience, and then you could do Salzburg or, you know, London, wherever you might want to be. But it's important for the students, and again, like I said, man, if I could do it all over again, I would have studied away. And so talk to your student about that. The other thing is, a lot of people think we can't afford it. Remember, the tuition you pay here is how you get to where you want to go. And so financial aid applies. We have some really generous donors who provide scholarships to help defray costs of studying away. It's the same thing, you know, we have donors who help with first-year journeys. We have, the donor base here is really pretty amazing. But they can be up to, I mean, I know some students who have gone for 2 semesters, 2 different locations. But you can do some short term in the May term, short couple of weeks in May term, but generally they're a semester abroad. Other questions? Yes? You getting your steps in, Jameson?
Speaking of that first year journey, are you, for our sophomores, what is that going to look like, or when is that going to be?
Yeah, I'm looking at Ken, but my understanding is we're going to try to create some first-year journey opportunities over fall break, and so that will come out of the first-year journeys office. My guess is pretty soon. Is that correct? What? Oh, 8 trips on September 11th. There you go. So I'm sure there'll be information published soon. Ken, first year, if recreation reports through Ken, and so if Ken says it, it's truth. So, yeah, the other thing we know about, this data is a little old. I was talking to some parents yesterday. It's probably about 3 years old. But we're really focused on high impact practices like doing things that we know make a difference and help with persistence. So student athletes persist at a higher rate. First year journey students actually persist 11% more likely, 11% more likely that they will graduate based on the data that we have. So if a cohort comes through, first year journey students graduate at really high rates if you compare them to the rest of that cohort population. And again, it's because they're engaged, they make a connection, they have stories to tell, they build really strong relationships. That's why being on a team, joining a Greek organization, all of those things in terms of getting students connected and engaged, high impact practices, research with a faculty member, all of those. If you Google high impact practices, it shows you the things that do have an impact on the student experience. Learning communities. So our first year seminars and the fact that students live together in the residence halls, we started that about 3 years ago because of what the data says. Much more likely to persist to graduation. Same thing with first year journeys. And I was in a meeting, I should shut up. Okay, we got 5 minutes. I was in a meeting talking to some folks, about a variety of things, and I just one-off mentioned first year journeys. I got off the phone, I had an email from this individual. Me and my wife would like to give $50,000 to help defray the cost of first year journeys for students because of what you shared about the data. And so the cost of first year journeys this year, all of them, went down. We were able to deduct from the cost because we had some donor who heard me talk about first year journeys and said, let me help. It's the kind of alumni we have. And our goal, if anyone is interested in talking about this more, let me know. We want every student, ideally within their first year, to go on a first year journey. So that's the ask we've put out to a number of people to try to help us. We want it to not cost students anything, because we know it can make a difference. There's one school in the country that I'm aware of that does that in really powerful ways. So if anybody's interested in learning more, let me know. But we're really focused on those types of things because it's important. Other questions? Any other Mets fans? Yes. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you tonight. You'll get to meet our new president. She's terrific. 7 o'clock. And dinner is at 5:30. If you want to stay in here because it's cool, you are more than welcome. Dinner is straight across to the Redlands lawn at 5:30. And if it's anything like last night, it'll be really good. So thank you so much for being here. So glad to have you on campus. So make it a good evening.